Imagine a small cardboard box, tossed aside in the woods like garbage. But inside was no ordinary trash, it was the body of a young boy. Bruised, malnourished, and wrapped in a thin blanket, left in silence, with no name and no one to claim him. For decades, he was known only as America's unknown child. This isn't a horror story. It happened in 1957, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A case so disturbing it captured the nation, and yet, for more than 65 years, the mystery of who this boy was, and how he ended up in that box, remained unsolved. Before we unravel this chilling case, let me ask you, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your location in the comments. It's always incredible to see how far these stories reach. And if you want to join a community that brings forgotten mysteries back into the light, make sure you subscribe. On February 25, 1957, a young man stumbled upon that box in Fox Chase, Philadelphia. Inside, wrapped in a plaid blanket, was the body of a small boy, just 4 to 6 years old. He weighed barely 30 pounds. His hair had been crudely cut, as if someone shaved it in a rush to hide something. His skin showed bruises, scars, and signs of malnourishment. Investigators found surgical scars on his groin, his ankle, and his chin. Some hinted at medical procedures. Others screamed abuse. The box itself had once held a J.C. Penney baby bassinet, traced back to a store in Upper Darby. But it was a dead end, hundreds were sold, and there was no way to know who bought this one. The child had no clothes. No shoes. Just that thin blanket. Detectives launched a massive investigation. They printed thousands of flyers with the boy's face and mailed them across Philadelphia. His picture was posted in gas stations, even stuffed into gas bills so every household would see him. And still, nothing. No missing child matched him. No parent stepped forward. No one claimed him. Think about that. A boy, someone's son, found dead in the woods, and the world responded with silence. That silence was as haunting as the crime itself. The press named him the boy in the box. Detectives gave him something more, their obsession. Many admitted later that they were haunted by his face, his lifeless eyes, his tiny frame, the injustice of how he'd been discarded like trash. But despite endless leads, the truth stayed buried. By the time weeks had passed, the case had already turned into one of Philadelphia's darkest mysteries. Who was this boy? Why was his identity erased? And why did no one, no family, no neighbor, no friend, ever come forward? As the years went on, theories would emerge, whispers of a foster home, shocking confessions, and family secrets too dark to ignore. And just when it seemed the case would be lost to history, new science would finally give him a name, but not the justice he deserved. What do you think so far? How does a child vanish from memory so completely that no one even reports him missing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel if you believe his story should never fade into silence. Picture this, Philadelphia, 1957. Detectives are working around the clock, chasing down leads, knocking on doors, and squinting at grainy fingerprints. They've got a dead child in a cardboard box, no ID, no missing person report, and a city that seems to have collectively shrugged and said, "Never seen him before, sorry." If this doesn't already sound bizarre, remember, this was the 1950s, when neighborhood gossip traveled faster than police bulletins. Yet somehow, no one in Philadelphia recognized this boy. Either he really was a ghost child, or someone did a very good job of erasing him. The investigation quickly grew into one of the largest manhunts in the city's history. Thousands of leads poured in, and each one felt promising, until it didn't. Police canvassed hospitals, orphanages, foster homes. They examined every missing child report in the region. Still nothing. detectives released post-mortem photos to the public, something unthinkable today. They dressed the boy in proper clothes, positioned his face carefully, and photographed him, hoping someone would see him and say, "That's Johnny from down the street." But the phones didn't ring with answers. They rang with tips, dead ends, and the occasional crank call. And then came the foster home theory. Just a mile and a half away from where the boy's body was discovered stood a foster home run by a woman and her family. To detectives, it was impossible to ignore. They investigated the place with a microscope. Did the boy live there? Did one of the kids recognize him? Did anyone in that house slip up and reveal a secret? Neighbors whispered about the foster home, claiming they saw a little boy who looked just like him. One medical examiner even noted the blanket wrapped around the boy's body was eerily similar to ones used inside the home. Coincidence? Maybe. But when it comes to murdered children, coincidence rarely soothes the stomach. The foster home's owner denied everything. Police searched. They pressed. They interrogated. And nothing stuck. No charges, no arrests, no smoking gun. So, back to square one. Years later, another theory crashed into the case like a bad soap opera twist. A woman named Martha came forward in 2002 with a story that felt ripped from a crime thriller. She claimed her mother had bought the boy, yes, bought him, and then subjected him to years of abuse before finally killing him in a fit of rage. Martha described the boy in chilling detail, his small size, his haircut, the way he was forced to live in the basement like some unwanted pet. She even said her mother once bathed him right before his death, explaining the clean fingernails and trimmed hair observed in the autopsy. Sounds convincing, right? Too convincing. Detectives were torn. Some believed Martha. Others pointed out her history of mental illness, questioning whether her story was truth or twisted fantasy. After all, her timeline and details didn't always align with the evidence. Still, many investigators admitted privately, she knew too much to just be making it all up. If Martha was lying, she was one of the best storytellers of her generation. If she was telling the truth, then Philadelphia had brushed up against the real culprit and let her walk away. But let's step back for a moment. The irony in all this? While detectives were running themselves ragged, the boy was buried in a potter's field, Philadelphia's cemetery for the unclaimed. His headstone didn't read his name. It read, "Heavenly Father, bless this unknown boy." Think about that. You're a detective who can crack burglaries and mob hits but can't figure out the name of a child dumped in your city. And every time you drive by his grave, you see that word, unknown. That word must have burned. And it did. For decades, generations of investigators carried this case like an open wound. Some retired still haunted by the boy's eyes. Others kept files in their homes, flipping through them late at night, hoping to spot something they missed. This wasn't just another case. This was the case that gnawed at Philadelphia's conscience. Now, here's where the story takes another twist, because every unsolved mystery needs one. In the 1990s, when DNA science began leaping forward, detectives exhumed the boy's body. They hoped to find a genetic match. They collected DNA samples. They built a profile. And for years, nothing. It sat in databases, waiting for science to catch up. And then, in 2022, a breakthrough. Using advanced genetic genealogy, investigators traced the boy's DNA to a family in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. After decades of silence, the boy in the box finally had a name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He wasn't a ghost child. He wasn't a phantom. He was a real boy, born January 13, 1953, to Augustus J. Zarelli and Mary Elizabeth Abel. He had siblings. He had a family. And yet, no one claimed him. Not when he vanished. Not when his face was plastered on flyers. Not when his grave marker read unknown. Irony at its cruelest, in 1957, detectives begged the public for help identifying the boy. And all along, His own family stayed silent. But identifying Joseph answered only one question. It didn't solve the case. Who killed him? Why was he discarded in that box? And what kind of family looks at their missing 4-year-old and decides, let's just not say anything? Investigators believe his parents are now deceased, taking their secrets to the grave. But whispers linger. Did extended family know? Did neighbors suspect? Did someone decide that silence was easier than the truth? Even after learning his name, Joseph's story remains one of the most heartbreaking examples of neglect, abuse, and indifference in American history. What do you think? Do you believe Martha's story, that the boy was sold and tortured in secrecy? Or was Joseph's own family hiding the truth all along? Drop your theories in the comments. I read them all, and trust me, in a case like this, every perspective matters. And if this story has already grabbed you, please take a second to like and subscribe. We're building a community that refuses to let stories like Joseph's vanish. Every new subscriber helps us shine a brighter light on the cases that others would rather forget. If you thought the story of the boy in the box ended when investigators put a name on his headstone, think again. Because solving one piece of a puzzle often makes the rest of the pieces even more maddening. After decades of chasing shadows, investigators finally stood in front of microphones in 2022 and proudly announced, he's not just a number anymore. He's Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Cue the applause, right? But here's the cruel joke, finding Joseph's name didn't actually solve the case. In fact, it just made the questions louder, sharper, and far more uncomfortable. Because now we know exactly who he was, and yet, we still don't know who silenced him. Let's rewind to the investigation's evolution over the years. This case didn't sit in some dusty filing cabinet. Oh no, it lived rent-free in the minds of detectives, journalists, and amateur sleuths for decades. People obsessed over it. They hosted podcasts before podcasts even existed. Newspaper clippings yellowed, but the mystery never lost its edge. Why? Because this wasn't just a cold case. This was a child. A 4-year-old boy stuffed into a box and left like discarded trash. If that doesn't strike at the heart of society, what will? Detectives cycled in and out of the case. Each generation swore they would be the ones to crack it. Some even confessed to carrying Joseph's photo in their wallets. Imagine sitting at a diner in Philly, ordering a cheesesteak, and pulling out your wallet, not to pay, but because you just can't stop staring at a dead child's eyes. That's the level of obsession we're talking about. And while the police were obsessed, so was the public. Cue the armchair detectives. If you thought Reddit detectives were relentless today, the boy in the box had his own army of amateur sleuths decades before the internet. People wrote letters, called hotlines, mailed in theories. Some even dug into genealogies with nothing but a magnifying glass and a library card. They speculated wildly. Was Joseph kidnapped? Was he part of a secret medical experiment? Was he abandoned by circus folk? Yes, that was a real theory. It was like America's most tragic true crime guessing game, except the prize was only heartbreak. And here's where irony comes slamming in again. Because while thousands of people were scrambling to solve the mystery of Joseph's identity, his biological family was living just a few miles away. His father, Augustus, was alive until 2014. His mother, Mary, until 1991. Both of them knew. Both of them stayed silent. And let's be brutally honest, what kind of parents don't report their 4-year-old missing? We lose sight of our car keys for 5 minutes, and it feels like the world is ending. But Joseph vanished. Silence. If guilt were a language, this silence screamed fluently. But just when you think the case couldn't twist any harder, the Martha theory slithered back into relevance. Remember Martha? The woman who claimed her abusive mother bought Joseph and kept him like a prisoner? For years, people dismissed her. Unreliable, they said. Mentally unstable. But let's pause here. She described the boy being bathed before his death. She described his small stature and his haircut. All details that aligned perfectly with autopsy results. So, here's the uncomfortable thought: what if Martha was telling the truth all along? What if investigators laughed off a confession because it came from someone labeled unstable? Wouldn't be the first time the system ignored a messy witness. Of course, critics point out her timeline was fuzzy. But is a fuzzy timeline really enough to dismiss a woman who might have held the key to one of America's oldest mysteries? Here's where you come in. Drop a comment. Do you think Martha was a fraud, or do you think investigators just didn't want to admit she might have been right? Now, fast forward to modern times. When DNA genealogy cracked Joseph's identity, detectives thought they'd finally get answers. Surely, someone in the Zarelli family would step up and talk. Surely, the skeletons in the closet would rattle loud enough for police to hear. But instead, silence. A wall of silence so thick, you could practically hear the universe laughing. Joseph's surviving siblings have refused to cooperate. Extended family has gone radio silent. It's as if the entire family tree collectively decided, our branch never existed. Good luck, detectives. Think about the irony. Millions of strangers across the world cried for this boy, prayed for him, even left flowers at his grave. Yet his own blood relatives shrugged and zipped their lips. And here's the part that makes this story dig into your ribs. Joseph's new headstone doesn't just say unknown boy anymore. It now reads, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Finally, after 65 years, the nameless child had an identity. People gathered at his reburial. They cried. They left stuffed animals. They spoke his name aloud, maybe for the first time in decades. But as touching as that moment was, it's bittersweet. Because it's hard to celebrate when the case is still unsolved. We now know who he was. But we still don't know who killed him, or why. Here's where the case stands today. Joseph's parents are both dead, taking secrets with them. Investigators strongly believe he was abused and neglected at home. Surviving siblings refuse to cooperate. Martha's story still lingers like a ghost, haunting, incomplete, unresolved. And the public continues to obsess over every shred of evidence, every possible theory. So, what do you think? Was Joseph's death a family cover-up? Or was Martha right, and the boy's tragic life was spent in someone else's basement, hidden from the world until the end? Drop your theories in the comments. Trust me, I read them all. And while we may never agree on the how, one thing is clear: this boy's story refuses to stay buried. And if you're hooked on this story, don't just sit on the sidelines. Like and subscribe. Because here, we don't just watch mysteries, we live inside them until they bleed answers. Picture this: a nameless boy in a box, a city haunted for decades, and now, finally, a name carved into stone. Joseph Augustus Zarelli. But here's the cruel reality: while his name is now known, his killer still isn't. Which begs the question, did solving the mystery of who he was actually bring us closer to why he died, or just remind us how utterly broken the system can be? When the Philadelphia police stood in front of cameras in December 2022 and announced Joseph's identity, it should have felt like a triumph. The kind of moment that closes chapters, ties bows, and finally lets a community heal. Instead, it felt more like ripping off a bandage and realizing the wound underneath was still gaping, still festering, still bleeding unanswered questions. Detectives admitted as much. Naming him wasn't the finish line. It was just another checkpoint. Because once you say this is Joseph, you now have to face the real monster. Why was he discarded like trash, and who put him there? And that's where the silence gets deafening. Let's talk about Joseph's parents for a moment. Augustus and Mary. Neither reported their son missing. Neither spoke up when his face was plastered across newspapers. Neither said a word when the city begged for leads. And when Augustus died in 2014, and Mary decades earlier in 1991, they took secrets with them. secrets that might have finally freed Joseph from the box, not the cardboard one, but the metaphorical prison of mystery he's been stuck in for 66 years. And here's where the irony turns tragic. Millions of strangers cared enough to cry for him, but the two people who should have loved him most didn't care enough to speak his name. The surviving siblings? They've been silent too. Investigators reached out, hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone in the family would finally tell the truth. Instead, doors slammed shut. No cooperation. No details. No justice. Which leaves us in this bizarre place. Joseph has a name, a grave, and millions of people mourning him, but no one with blood ties willing to give him justice. It's like finally turning on a light in a dark room, only to realize you're still trapped inside. And then there's Martha. The woman people dismissed as unstable. The woman whose story about her abusive mother buying a boy matched details of Joseph's death in eerie ways. Sure, she didn't hand investigators a neat, signed confession with bullet points. But maybe, just maybe, she gave them the only breadcrumbs she could. And instead of following them, investigators swept them off the table. Now, decades later, the details she offered still haunt the case. Was she telling the truth? Did she hold the missing piece? Or did investigators let bias blind them to what could have been their best lead? If Joseph could speak, I wonder if he'd say, "You dismissed the one person who tried to help me." So, what's left? A grave that finally has a name. A city still haunted by a boy who never got to grow up. Detectives who refuse to close the file, even after 66 years. And the rest of us, left to stare into the abyss of what kind of cruelty it takes to silence a child, and what kind of cowardice it takes to stay silent after. Joseph Augustus Zarelli isn't just a case. He's a reminder that for every cold case we hear about, there's a family that failed, a community that's scarred, and a justice system that sometimes just doesn't have enough teeth. But here's the one thing no one can deny. Joseph may have been voiceless in life, but in death, he refuses to stay quiet. His story still rattles through newsrooms, courtrooms, living rooms, and now, through your screen. And that's where you come in. So I'll ask you directly, what do you think really happened to Joseph? Was it a family cover-up? A dark secret hidden by silence? Or was Martha's story the closest we'll ever get to the truth? Drop your theories in the comments. Because the more people keep this conversation alive, the harder it becomes for his memory to fade into the background. And if you want to stand with Joseph, not just as a name on a stone, but as a boy whose story demands justice, then subscribe to this channel. Because here, we don't let the forgotten stay forgotten. We dig, we expose, and we shine light into the darkest corners. Let's hit that 100,000 subscriber mark together, not just for the numbers, but so stories like Joseph's never vanish into silence again. This is not just a case. This is not just history. This is a boy in a box, still asking us, will you remember me? And the only answer we should ever give is yes.